Hi everyone, it's Lauren and today we're going to be going through my top 10 favourite classics. So I've got books here up until the 19th century, no later than that, but if you would also like me to do a video on my favourite modern classics, then leave me a comment below and I can get working on that one as well. These are loosely in a top 10 order. My favourite two are at the top, but everything else is kind of fluid. I don't have exact rankings. So let's start with Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I first read this at school, as I think lots of people do. We studied it for A-level, and it's one of those books where I even actually quite enjoyed it, even while we were reading it when I was a teenager. This is, of course, about young Victor Frankenstein, who gets a little bit too big for his boots and thinks he can create life, which it turns out he can, and he creates his creature out of dead body parts. He works out the secret to life, but of course, things start to go very wrong very quickly. And this book is told in like a Russian doll narrative. It starts with someone meeting Frankenstein in the Arctic after everything has happened. You then get his narrative of his life from childhood and him creating the creature, which immediately runs off and he doesn't see it again for a while. Then we get the story of the creature when he bumps into it again, and we understand what he's been doing in his time apart, before it then goes back to Victor Frankenstein and back towards the end where we met them right at the beginning. It's a great look at the meaning of life and science and whether you should tinker around in that arena. Also the idea of fate and what someone is destined to become, whether something's in their genes or whether someone can be educated. And I think what I like about it is it's that part of history when anything seemed possible and science and discoveries were happening all the time. And it felt like something like this could be around the corner. People didn't really know. And there's lots of discussions of young Victor learning about science and getting really excited about it. And it's the kind of thing where, especially when I was a teenager, I could have found it quite boring reading about Frankenstein, learning about physics. But I actually found it really interesting because his passion is so contagious. Another book I read at school, which I've actually learnt to love, which was Far from the Madding Crowd by Thomas Hardy. I think, to be fair, I did learn to love this, one, when I reread it as an adult, and two, when I watched all of the different adaptations, which I did for one of my page to screen videos, which I did many years ago. And what I love about this story is how rich the cast of characters are. I haven't actually read another Thomas Hardy, so I'd love to have recommendations from you in the comments below of what else I should read. But he really richly layers all of the different characters within the farm, within the village, and you feel like you know them all so intimately, even though they're completely like besides the point characters, they're not important to the plot, as well as nature, which is a huge presence within this novel. The story centres around Bathsheba Everdeen, who inherits a farm and has three different suitors. Gabriel Oak, who is a strong shepherding type. We've got Mr. Boldwood, who is very, very rich and quite isolated, and also the dashing and exciting Sergeant Troy. So it's just about her working out who she's going to end up with, really. But what I very much enjoyed about it is that passing of time. You really get a sense of not very much happening on the farm, which is what lives would have been like back then. Like, there's lots of everyday things that happen, and suddenly when a very small incident that doesn't normally happen comes out of the blue, it can really make people ruminate on things, get ideas into their heads, get a bit excited, and it's hard to explain that without giving the plot away, but you really got that sense of the sameness of the routine of life on the farm, and how thrilling it is when somebody new comes into town. My next book is also about kind of the everydayness of people, and that's what I love it for. That's Cranford by Elizabeth Gaskell. This is just about people in a town, basically. Nice little old ladies, people going around their day, and people are quite eccentric. You get the perspective of a young woman who's gone to visit her aunts, and she's one of those people who's not really engaging in the elements of plot herself. She's sort of just relaying it back to you, and it's very episodic. This was made into a TV miniseries many years ago with Judi Dench in it, and I can completely see how it was adapted, because it just feels like a soap almost, just little events which are happening in this village life with some kind of background overarching plot, but really it's just about them and their silly, funny, eccentric ways, and it just felt like a warm hug. Next we have two books by Charles Dickens. I've read several of his, not loads, and I've had mixed feelings. But I found that when I like his writing, I really like it. So the two we have here are a classic, A Christmas Carol. I absolutely adore this book, and of course enjoy the infamous Muppet adaptation, but it is such a sumptuous book to read, especially of course around Christmas. The descriptions of the tables and the produce and the decorations are just so joyous, and it's very short and very easy to read, and I just love it. It's one of those books which is in my soul, I feel. And then one of his other books that I really enjoy is A Tale of Two Cities, and it feels quite different, this to me, than some of his other work. But to be fair, the other ones that I've read are Great Expectations, David Copperfield, and The Old Curiosity Shop, which I did not like. So A Tale of Two Cities feels quite different to them. I don't know how it compares to some of his other work, but this is about the French Revolution and some of the characters getting caught up in it, notably an English family who are in Paris trying to escape. But you see lots of different pasts of different characters coming together. Perhaps I like it because it takes place for the majority of the time in Paris, and it's quite different to some of what he normally writes. But it's also very philosophical on kind of the nature of society then, both in London and in Paris, and also between the upper class and the lower classes, and what it was like for everybody. And it's one of his more readable books, I think. It's not a huge long one, and it doesn't have as many characters, I think, as some of his other works. It focuses quite specifically on a few people, and it almost didn't feel like I was reading Dickens. Now we have, I suppose, the top 5, and I'm afraid 3 of them are by the same author, and I hate to be thoroughly predictable, but it's Jane Austen, and those books are Emma, Sense and Sensibility, and Pride and Prejudice. I will not apologise for loving these books, and they are completely my favourite books of hers. I know they're the most famous, most read, most adapted, but they're the ones I enjoy the most. So, sorry to be basic, but I love them. Persuasion and Northanger Abbey I thought were okay, completely fine, enjoyed reading them, but they didn't really grab me, and I haven't read Mansfield Park yet, so that's the one exception that I'm yet to read. But these 3, I think I probably don't need to explain the plots of them to you, but they just have such strong characters. I love the way the plots develop. I think the misunderstandings are completely understandable as a reader, and I think all of the characters are complex and interesting, and I really love them. Of the 3, Pride and Prejudice probably is my favourite, just because I had such a soft spot for the 2005 film adaptation, and I fell completely in love with it, which I did see before I read it, which I think really affects your reading of these books. I've since, of course, seen many other adaptations, including the BBC one with Colin Firth and Jennifer Earle, and I love that as well. I think the story is so cosy. I find it so romantic as well, and I'm quite a cynical person at heart, so, you know, I get completely swept up in it, and I think the characters are hilarious. If I had to order them, I might rank Emma next, and then Sense and Sensibility last. But I think also my enjoyment of these books does come from the different adaptations. I think it's really interesting to compare and contrast different adaptations of the same source material, because you get something slightly different each time. So perhaps because these have been adapted the most, I also feel like I have such a depth of knowledge of them. So now we're at the top 2. I wonder if you can guess what these are. If you do guess correctly, let me know in the comments below, or let me know what you think they're going to be, and we'll see if you're right. So number 2 is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. This book has just grown up in my soul over the years. When I first read it, I thought, oh, great story, but so boring, and I really struggled to read it. I was probably in my early 20s. I just thought, oh, like, I get it, like, I like the structure, but God, it took me forever. When I read it a second time, I fell in love with it, and I couldn't believe that I found it boring the first time round. I think Jane is such a sympathetic character. I'm so on her side throughout. And yeah, I think the pacing is a little bit odd. We spend a lot of time at Jane's school, which seemingly doesn't really have any bearing on the plot later on. But I think overall you get such a strong sense of Jane's yearning throughout the book for something more in her life. Of course, while she's at Thornfield Hall acting as a governess, there is a lot of yearning for Mr. Rochester, although she doesn't really understand it at first. But really it's for some kind of ownership, for some kind of freedom. And just for something more that she's allotted to by her station in life and by the fact that she's a woman without very much money. And as well as the fact that I have read it a couple of times now, I do feel like watching several adaptations has really solidified that love for me. I'd have to watch back my page to screen video on Jane Eyre because I can't actually remember what I said now, but I feel like there was not an adaptation I didn't love, like for different reasons. I had favourites, but I just enjoyed every viewing of it. I think it's a great story, and the more I watch adaptations, the more I just fall in love with Jane and Mr. Rochester as characters, and I just want them to end up together. I just find it, I don't know, I'm just swept up in it. And number one, my favourite classic of all time, so far, of course, is Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. I'm in love with this book. I don't think there's really an adaptation I've seen that I heartily enjoyed, but I love the reading process of it. I feel like all the characters are so alive to me, that I find it baffling that they're not real people. So this is mostly about Anna Karenina, a married woman, and her disastrous affair with Count Vronsky, which causes a lot of scandal in the Russian upper class because her husband, I think, refuses to divorce her. There's a child involved, and also Vronsky has been philandering about with other people in different families. But it's really about the relationships between many people. There's several high-class Russian families at the heart of this, and I mean, I could give or take Anna and Vronsky. Don't love them. I think she's a very flawed character, and I love that in a main protagonist, but she's not why I fall in love with this book. I fall in love with this book because of Levin and Kitty, and because of Dolly, because of just all these normal family interactions, which are just so interesting and intricate and so carefully built up. It's a very, very long, very thoughtful book, and I would love to read War and Peace. That is on my list for next year, because if it's anything like Anna Karenina, I think I will love it just as much. I did watch the adaptation of that, and I felt like I could really see Tolstoy's philosophy, like his philosophical ramblings, which are very evident in Anna Karenina. I could see them even through the adaptation, through the screen. I could get what was coming out of War and Peace, so I'm really, really keen to read that for myself now. I would love to know what your favourite classic books are as well, so do leave a comment with what would be in your top 10, or top, just top anything. You don't have to run to 10 if you don't have 10. I will be trying to make a few more videos like this with general recommendations, so if you have any other kind of genre of book or type of book that you would like some recommendations for, then also leave me a request in the comments and I'll see what I can do. And until then, I'll see you in my next video. Bye!